we're here doing the biggest show yet that we have done from Washington, D.C. You've already seen Greg Norman, and you're about to see one of the people here at Fox News. We'll talk to many of the people on the telly on Fox News as the week rolls on, as we get ready for that state visit. But the first is Brett Baier. He's their national political anchor. He's essentially the American version of David Spears. I don't know whether he would know that compliment, but certainly it's one that we send Spears his way. And here's what Brett Baier had to say about what it is like to live in this city, to have one foot between the media and the politics, how to cover Trump, and what it was like to be in the front row when Trump started to become the man who won the presidency, and fingers crossed will do so again in November next year. Brett, an absolute thrill to talk to you. Thank you very much for having us to your place here in DC.
You bet. Thanks. Welcome.
How this must be an amazing time to have the front row seat at the #1 cable station when politics feels like it's not just the topic of the nation, but you turn on a film podcast, you read like things that aren't supposed to be about politics become politics. What's it like to be in the front row?
It's historic. Every day is different. I tell my staff that we are one tweet away from changing our whole show, which does happen frequently. And it is a bit like drinking from a fire hose. You know, you're trying to sift through the news of the day. There used to be 1 or 2 news cycles every day. Now there are 6 or 7. And so we're constantly on the go.
So before we get to today, let's go back to the famous first Republican debate. Yourself, Megyn Kelly, are there. You're the moderators. That string of Republican candidates that are there. And you could see that Donald Trump was winning over the room and slowly but surely the audience. Could you see, what was the moment in that campaign where you started to realise this guy's going to be the nominee?
Yeah. So that first debate, first of all, it was in August of 2015, and we didn't think a lot of people would tune in. 26 million tuned in. It was the biggest non-sports event on cable. And it was just a big moment, but it was a culmination of this campaigning that we started to see people saying, you know, this guy, you know, I'm following this guy. And I used to take Ubers in different states that I would go to, and I'd ask the drivers, you know, what are you thinking about this election? And 36 out of 38 said, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump.
Wow.
And I said, well, why are you going to do that? And he said, all of them pretty much said, you know, I think we should kick the table over and try something different. Democrats stink, Republicans stink, and it should be something different. And that's what happened.
Because how much of that is that it feels like every 8 years when there's a presidential election that's a reaction to the administration that's just been there, be it Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, they all say Washington's broken, Washington's dysfunctional, vote for me, it's time for change. How much of that residual language that was there over decades, really, the ultimate personification of that is Trump? Trump didn't just happen in 2016. It feels like the beginnings of it were there for a couple of decades.
Definitely. And you see that in the pendulum swinging each time, as you mentioned, each election. But this election felt different. This election felt like it was a tipping point where people said, you know, Washington, period, is not working. We need something outside the box. These is Democrats, Independents, and Republicans saying this. I was at the Democratic convention in Philadelphia, and there were a bunch of union guys that were working the tent where we were. And they all had T-shirts that said, I'm with Hillary, because it was the union. And I walked out, and one guy said, hey, psst, Brett, I just want you to know, I'm not with Hillary. And I said, really? You know, there are a lot of guys like you. And he said, come on. And we went to this lunch area, and there were 150 guys. And they said, how many of you are with Hillary? And nobody. How many of you are with Trump? And they all threw their hands up. Now, I said, can I do that on camera? And he said, no.
Absolutely
I would lose
not.
my job. But it was indicative of what I think you saw, is that people had that feeling, try something different, but they couldn't talk about it or they didn't want to talk about it. And that's how we got a lot of that vote.
So it's that thing where, and in the years since, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of metaphor, there's a lot of actual stuff that's going on. How do you work out what's the news of the day versus the noise of the day?
That's a tough issue. I talk about it like it's an iceberg. You know, we cover the controversy, which is the iceberg above the water. But there's so much stuff happening below the water. There's a huge iceberg that we want to be able to cover on my show, to where you get to the end of the hour and you say, okay, I have a good sense of what's happening in the world and in the U.S. If you just deal with the tweets of the day or the controversy of the day, I think people get to the end and realize they're not satisfied with it, that they know what's going on. So we try to balance that out, even though there's a lot of turmoil about whatever the president says or tweets or some other big thing that's happening that day.
Does the president watch, and what do you do if he sends you a text or calls you straight after?
So he does watch. We've had a panel on the show numerous times where I'd have a subject, for example, like North Korea would be the subject with the panel, and then during that panel there'd be a tweet that says, you know, Rocket Man is negotiating or something, and I would read the tweet on the panel, you know, as it's happening. So
wow.
I know he watches. You know, he sometimes likes the opinion shows on Fox a little bit better than the news shows.
Sure.
But we cover them fairly, and hopefully he's going to give us another interview soon. I've had one over the time he's been in office.
Wow, okay, well, come on, Mr. President, this guy, you know, please, I'm sure he'll be watching cable news in Australia. The race for 2020,
yeah.
you mentioned how big those numbers were for the Republican first debate. 18 million was it for the Democrats. It's all about turnout here, not compulsory voting. Does that tell you anything about that, all this supposed anti-Trump energy, that the showcase of the alternatives to Trump doesn't deliver what the first outing of Trump was as just a candidate?
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, the Trump phenomena is unique, as a character, as a person that we'd seen for decades on the front of New York tabloid papers and on TV. So it was a different kind of animal. And I think the Democrats are trying to attract some of that attention with their candidates. But there will be a lot of interest in this election, and the base of both parties will be motivated. The real question is, what are the independents, the people who lean left, lean right? How do they come down? And there are a lot of key issues that are going to decide that.
Last political question. How big a deal is it that Donald Trump is doing the state dinner, the state visit, the full rollout for our Prime Minister, second only in his term in office? What does it say about the way he views our Prime Minister and our country?
I think it is key. It sends a really strong message about the relationship between the U.S. and Australia. Clearly, they don't have a lot of state dinners around here. If you're on that list, you are getting lifted up as someone that the U.S., this administration, the country really considers a friend. And obviously, all the things that Australia does with its military to help our military overseas has not gone unnoticed. Your ambassador here, a friend of mine, but also a really smooth operator as far as this town goes, and dealing with the administration, but also dealing with Capitol Hill. He's one of the best I've seen do it.
Yeah, it's that thing where he's been able to work out that you work the Congress, not just the White House, you play both sides, and you do so in open dealings, which brings me to my last question.
Yes.
Is it true
Yeah.
that Joe Hockey sunk a 40-foot putt while you were playing golf with him and Donald Trump?
It is, in fact, true.
Whoa.
It is true. It's not fake news. It's not fake news.
Not fake news.
I was there. I was not supposed to be playing with the president. He was added at the last minute. I was playing with Joe and Mick Mulvaney, and the president added in, and we played 9 holes. And on the 9th hole, I'm pretty sure it was the 9th hole, he did make a 40-foot putt.
Well, I'm sure that's one of his great achievements. State dinner second?
Yeah.
The putt
It might have
probably.
been for bogey. But
Oh, wow.
no, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
Yeah, don't do that. Brett, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, man. Nice guy, and he's in charge of all of the operations here in DC. Very kind of him to have us. And plenty more Fox News people will be on the show as the days roll on between now and the state visit at the end of the week.